Hi everybody, Anthony Carey here from Function First in San Diego, California. I have with me Wendy Cole, one of our team members here. Today we're going to talk about strategic movement to improve myofascial mobility. We're going to talk about motion versus using foam rollers or other types of rollers or other type of kitten tools that we use to self-myofascial release. By using motion, we're going to gain a few advantages that we may not get from doing the tools like the foam roller. Instead, what we're going to look at is how we can facilitate motion specifically through oscillating movements. And the way that we're going to do that is by considering a range or what's called an amplitude that is less than a point where we're going to basically engage the mechanoreceptors in the joint, which potentially could cause an upregulation and therefore a greater resistance or what's called a joint barrier. If we thought about the functional testing grid here as kind of a joint range, and if this all the way into this grid was where the maximal tension was hit. So when we think in barrier, we're not necessarily thinking a wall as much as we're thinking about resistance from behind or pulling us versus bumping into something. If this is complete slack and relaxation in the tissue, we actually want to place somewhere in between a little bit. And this is where that oscillating motion comes in, so that we're not completely slacking the joint, certainly not moving into the barrier. And by doing that, we do get that down-regulatory effect through the autonomic nervous system that causes a calming. And by doing that, we can start to gradually and progressively increase what's called the amplitude, which is the size of the motions, to eventually get into more global movements that are bigger, incorporating more parts. So for example, I'm going to have Wendy come around here, and we're going to do an anterior mobilization, or mobilization of the anterior hip joint in the sagittal plane. And if we just stay in the sagittal plane, what you're going to see is Wendy doing just a small, very rhythmical, very controlled motion. And that's the key to this. If we go too fast or too hard, it's going to elicit a response that we don't want from all the receptors around the joint, both in the fascia and in the joint capsule. Staying nice, and the amplitude is small. And then what we can do from here is a progression. Right now it's essentially the hip. Now we're going to incorporate the thorax a little bit. So she's going to start to move the trunk back a little bit, further lengthening through that line. And then the next progression from that would be she'd incorporate the arms, extending the thorax through. You'll see that she'll start to notice intuitively or kinesthetically, the client has to be able to kind of sense that relaxation of the tissue. Otherwise, they're going to start to make those amplitudes too large too soon. And now, eventually, Wendy will go into a little bit more of an aggressive motion where the arms really start to move back. And now here's more of your, perhaps one of your more familiar mobilizing techniques of the soft tissue. At the same time, she's also getting some motion in her ankle with this particular exercise. Now we can also take a tool like the cortex, and the motion of the cortex and the ball transfers letting us move in the X, Y, and Z axis will give us more of a bottom-up oscillation. So Wendy got in the same movement over here, and what we're going to do is have her foot, front hip still flexed. In the back, she's going to go through that oscillation now, real subtle movements, but the cortex is actually doing the movement for her. And it's very rhythmical in that nature. Now, because of the design of the cortex and the movement that it provides, we can do this in the sagittal plane. Wendy can do it in the frontal plane. Same effects, same benefits, just coming at the tissue a different way. And we can even go transverse plane here. By doing that, she's still staying in that small amplitude of motion, but eventually that'll get larger and larger as the tissue is receptive to what we want it to do. So consider using some motion in conjunction with your tools as you're getting after the myofascial component. Consider using small motions initially that actually have a neurophysiological effect and not as much of a mechanical effect initially to get into larger movements in a more effective way with your clients. I'm Anthony Carey with Function First. Thanks for watching.